Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining me. This is Stephanie here, and I am bringing you Summer 2024 Paper Rose Studio Release. And you can find this at spellbinders.com. I'm really excited to show this to you. Paper Rose Studio has so many beautiful designs. We're going to start off here with the die cuts. This die cut set is called Maya's Garden. And if you go to the Spellbinders website, you'll see the entire release. There's so much more than this. These are just the items that I chose to play around with today. I also have the Paper Rose Arty Love Mark Maker, the Paper Rose Mosaic Lotus metal cutting die, and then I have the Paper Rose Mega Alpha Clear stamp set. So these are the things we're going to be playing with today. And then additionally, I have these unbelievably gorgeous papers. This is the Inky Color Paper Collection. It comes in 12 by 12 and also 6 by 6. It's the same designs in both, and these are some of the most beautiful papers I have ever seen, honestly. I cannot recommend these enough. You are going to get so much use out of these. I'm going to go buy a bunch more actually because I don't want to run out. I love alcohol inks, but I don't know about you, but it takes so much time to get out all the alcohol inks, play around with them, try and get something that looks good. And here you have an entire collection that is like alcohol ink backgrounds, and you don't have to do a single thing. It's all there for you. So I am a huge fan of these papers. As I was thinking about how to put all of these elements together, the cutouts really lended themselves to me to kind of like a shabby chic design. And I found the back of one of the more colorful pieces of paper had this kind of more muted monochromatic kind of look with the kind of the blues and the kind of almost coffee browns. And I thought those matched really well actually with the paper cutouts. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to make like a shabby chic design that combines these elements. One of the downsides of having such beautiful paper is that the back side is just as stunning as the front side. So I'm definitely going to have to go buy more of these papers because look at how gorgeous that color. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but the gold lines that are going through the paper there actually do sparkle. So when you hold it up to the light, it really looks gorgeous, the veins of color of that gold color that go through. I'm going ahead and just removing the white outline of all these die cuts. And you could leave them if you want, but just for me, I preferred the look without them. And that even includes these flowers. So I went in there with my X-Acto knife and really kind of fussy cut all of those, just because I really wanted to isolate those flowers and make them visible. And I wanted to make sure that the background was also visible. I didn't want to hide any of that with any of the white paper. So even though it took a little bit of time, I think in the end it was worth it. To hide that white outline even more, I went ahead with my ink daubers and some of the distress inks, and I looked for those that were very similar in color to the background, that kind of marbled background that we're going to be using. And this is also to distress it, but also then to kind of make it more of the color of the background and just kind of tie everything together. I'm using Altenew's Stampwheel here, and the sticky platform for this is absolutely perfect for doing anything like stenciling or doing anything with like the ink daubing that I'm doing now, especially when you've got really tiny pieces. Like that leaf there would be really hard to get. It would slip and slide all over my glass mat, but with the sticky mat, it just goes on so quickly, and then it wipes off so quickly. It's very easy to clean too. I just use water there. To distress these even more, I'm just using a little white acrylic paint in a spray bottle mixed with water, and then you just spray it on. It's a little hard to see here, but again, it adds to kind of that shabby chic design, kind of that distressed look. I'm also going in with the ink daubers and just going around the edges of my paper and just adding a little more distressing, a little more kind of fading, antiquing kind of look there. To further distress the die cuts, I'm going to be using Susan's Garden Ultimate Toolkit. Now, if you use any of Susan Tierney Cockburn's dies, you know that she likes to use this set here to go ahead and make her petals look really realistic. Here's a little hint for you, actually. It took me forever to figure out the tool-in-one. I thought I was twisting it to try and get the different tool elements in, but actually you just pull back on the top piece and it's kind of spring-loaded. So it took me a little while to figure that out. So just a hint for you in case you are getting it and you're like, does this work? So yeah, just pull back on that spring-loaded top and you can do that. Now, using the different elements of the tool-in-one, you can go ahead and distress your die cuts and flower dies and anything like that. And so what I'm doing here, I'm going in with the round one and I'm just doing it pressing down on it and making the flower petals come up, and you'll see when I'm done that they come up and they look a little bit more realistic. So I like the effect that that gives. With the tool-in-one, there's also this smaller little ball top, and I'm using that for the smaller leaf. For the sentiment, I'm going to go ahead and use these alphabet stamps. Now, I'm not sure if these are supposed to be used as just one solid stamp. They come as a solid stamp altogether, so I decided to cut them apart though because I thought they'd be more useful to me that way, and I know some people get a little nervous about cutting apart their stamps, but really don't. Don't be afraid at all to do it. The photopolymer comes apart very easily, and it just makes the stamp more useful in my opinion, but you do you. If you want to keep it all as one stamp, I could see people having use for it that way also. I decided I'm going to do the sentiment just love, and I'm lining it up here on my glass mat, and that way you can see the lines there. I know that way that all my letters are going to be lined up perfectly because I'm lining up just with that line on my glass mat. I use an acrylic block then to lift those up from my glass mat. It comes off very easily, and now I know all of my letters are lined up perfectly. I'm using VersaFine black embossing ink. This ink dries very slowly, so that way when you are going to be using your embossing powder, the embossing powder will stick to it. I'm going to go ahead and use gold embossing powder. I thought the gold embossing powder would really draw out those kind of gold lines, the veins of the kind of marbled look there. And then I also put a little bit of embossing powder on the sides to kind of give it a little bit more oomph and to kind of tie in the gold from the love, because it is a slightly different tone, but it all goes together. I chose this stencil because I loved all of the different kind of distressed images that there are. So you've got like the splatter there, you've got the X's, you've got the lines, and I just thought those would be so useful. So I went ahead and I got this stencil for that reason, because I just think it's going to be so versatile. I'm using Simon Hurley's Solar Paste here, and the Solar Paste, this particular color I like. I'm not quite sure, I can't remember what the name of it is, but this one lets the colors of the paper kind of shine through. When it dries opaque, but it also kind of takes on the color of anything you put it on. So that's why I tend to use this particular color quite a bit, and I'll link that down below. That stenciling just goes ahead and adds more to that kind of shabby chic design, that distressed look. And the Solar Paste comes off very easily just with a baby wipe there. I wanted the love letters to stand out a bit more, so I just went in with a pen, and this is a really fine line marker, and went ahead and just outlined those, kind of just gave it a shadow. In my stash, I had this burlap ribbon. I thought this went really well. Again, shabby chic, and the colors just matched perfectly, so I decided to go ahead and use that. I love how all of the colors here really go together. I just could not have picked it more perfectly, that this background and these die cuts just match perfectly. It wasn't intentional, but I'm so glad that they did. I used a gold enamel dot, also from Spellbinders, just in the center of the flower there, and I think it just brings a little bit more focus and attention to it, which is nice. I have a plain black card base that I'm adhering this to, and then I'm also going to put an inner panel on the black cards that I make. I always put an inner panel, obviously, that way you can write your sentiment and write your letter. This is my completed shabby chic card. It's got a lot of different elements to it, but I think they all come together really nicely in the end. Now moving on to card number 2. When I saw this die, which I just think is so gorgeous, it's lotus flowers, it's just absolutely gorgeous. It brought to mind a stained glass window, and then with these papers, even more so. So I thought, what better way to use this die than to make it into kind of a stained glass window card. So I'm just looking here at the different papers and just kind of seeing like which color scheme I want to use. I want to use one that isn't kind of multicolored like the one that you see here. I want one that's kind of more one color throughout. So you'll see that I picked, you know, one of the pieces of paper had more greens in it, one of them had more pinks, one of them had more blues. So I went ahead and picked those papers. I went ahead and die cut this, and then using this tip that I picked up from Jennifer McGuire, this is an absolutely fantastic idea. I'm using some cling wrap here, some press and seal, and just lifting this up so all the little die cut pieces are then going to stay in the same place. And that makes it so much easier when you are doing a lot of piecing with die cuts, because all those little pieces would be so hard, almost impossible to try to fit together if I didn't know where they were supposed to go to begin with. For the edge of my card, I wanted to kind of have a gilt look, and, you know, again, calling to mind the kind of gold thread veins that go through the paper. You'll be able to see those. So I'm going to go ahead and use some embossing ink, some clear embossing ink around the edges, and then I'm just going to sprinkle that with some gold embossing powder. I'm going to kind of shake off some of the embossing powder from the sides so that it doesn't you know, it's not completely covered. And you can see there I'm kind of distressing the sides even a little bit more because I want it to have that aged look to it. And then I'm going in and with my heat gun just going ahead and melting that embossing powder. I cut this die one more time from just plain black cardstock. This is really thick cardstock, which is really what you want when you're going for that stained glass look, because you're going to want to put the pieces like really embedded in there and you want them to stay in place. So this is a little thicker than the paper rose paper that I cut the other pieces from. I'm adhering that to my card base, and I'm not worrying too much if the glue kind of seeps through the edges. This is the Art Glitter Glue. I have tried a lot of glues, guys. This is honestly the best one that I've ever found. It gives you really nice adherence, and it dries completely clear, so I never have to worry if I'm going over the edges. I originally had 3 different die cuts of this image that I was going to use. You'll see in the end I actually decided to only use the 2. I take the blue one off, but I went with more this greenish blue one. So I'm just going ahead putting all these pieces in there, and as you can see, these pieces are really tiny and finicky. This would be incredibly hard to do if I hadn't used that cling wrap press and seal. I keep calling it cling wrap, but it's press and seal. If I hadn't used that press and seal to keep all the pieces together, because I'm not good with puzzles, maybe you are, but I definitely would not have been able to put all these pieces together if I hadn't done that. I raised that up on some foam tape there on the back, and I'm just going ahead and adhering this to a black card base. And then on the inside, I'm going to add a white panel as well. So just putting those final touches together. I have a huge stash of pre-cut, pre-made sentiments. I oftentimes take an afternoon and just cut out a ton of different sentiments, and that way I have them, and so when I'm making my cards then I don't have to go searching for like the perfect sentiment. I have a bunch that are already made. So I went ahead and I just grabbed one of the sentiments from my stash here. Going ahead putting the finishing touches on this card with some of these gems. These are kind of clear, sparkly gems, also from Spellbinders. And I just love the way that this turned out. What do you guys think? I think this really looks like stained glass in the end. For my next 2 cards, I'm going ahead and using this freezer paper. I think in some countries it's called butcher paper. I think in the UK it might be called butcher paper, but the important thing is that there's a kind of a plasticky side on the back. If you go into my playlist under videos and sort by most popular, you will find a video there that goes more in depth as to how to use this technique. But you really want to make sure that the side that you want is the plasticky one. So go ahead and whichever one is the plasticky side, that's the side you're going to then be putting down as the mask. So just keep that in mind as you're die cutting. I then go ahead and take my card panel and I put the die cut that we just made with the plastic side down, and I run it through my laminator. And there's just a parchment paper sheet there that I'm kind of using as a carrier sheet, just kind of fold it over to make sure that the die cut piece doesn't come up as it's going through, because otherwise it would probably get caught. So this keeps it from getting caught. So it's just a piece of parchment paper there that's folded over the other paper, which has the die cut on it. And I'm not using anything to adhere the die cut to it. That paper is enough as it goes through the the machine. And as it goes through the machine, then that plastic, the heat from the laminator, will melt that plastic onto the piece of paper. So you can see there it's completely adhered. You've got a perfect mask. And I'll show you later how to take that mask off. It's super simple. For the first card I'm making, I adhered it to kind of smooth cardstock, and I'm using some Copic markers. I'm not great with Copic markers. I love how they feel when I use them, and how they go onto the paper so smoothly, but I'm not great with blending. But I think this still came out pretty well. It has a really nice kind of almost watercolory look, but you'll see for my next card I do a watercolor, and it does give it a different look, but I think this still looks pretty cool. So you see here, to remove that mask then, all I did was go ahead with my heat gun and reheated that plastic just a little bit, and it comes off super smooth, super easily, and it gives this kind of finished look. Now I'm using a Jelly Roll clear glitter pen going over the petals, and it's really subtle, really hard to see on camera here, but when you hold it up to the light and kind of move it back and forth, you can see the glitter that shows up on the petals. Then wishing you all the best is the sentiment that I'm using here. And again, one of the sentiments that I have from my stash from the afternoons that I spend when I'm not feeling that creative, and I just go ahead and make sentiment after sentiment, so that way when I'm putting the cards together, I don't need to take time to do that. I'm putting these sequins on the card as well. The pinks and the blues there, really kind of a nice aquatic theme. I think these colors work perfectly for this card. And I really love these sequins from Spellbinders because they don't have the hole in the middle. So many sequins have that hole in the middle. It's fine, but I like the kind of clean professional look that these have when they are just completely solid and don't have that hole in the middle. For this next card, I'm going through and doing the same thing, only this time I'm using watercolors. And you'll see I accidentally die cut this on the wrong side, so that's why the image is flipped. So the plastic side ended up on the opposite side that it would normally be. But I think it's perfectly fine, and it's a great way to make kind of use of the cards, and you could probably do some pretty cool things with that, doing it double-sided that way. So you'll see there the plastic kind of repels the watercolors, and so when you then take it off, you're going to have an absolutely beautiful look with those white lines very clearly delineated. It's one of the reasons I really love this freezer paper technique, is because oftentimes other masks are made with paper that will get saturated, and then those colors will kind of run underneath the area where you've masked. But because this plastic adheres to the paper, it will not run underneath the paper, the plastic mask, and that way you'll have those very clearly defined lines. I'm cutting this panel to size, and an interesting thing here, so I have another paper cutter that I tend to use quite a bit, but I like this Tim Holtz one specifically because of the way that you can line things up and know that things are going to be straight. There's that little ridge, that little guard there, and so when you are lining things up with that, you know that it's straight, so that is super helpful. Putting these elements together here, and for the kind of matted background, I decided to use black to really highlight and contrast with the lighter colors of the watercolor. And then I'm putting that on top of another mat that is made with a background from those Paper Rose papers. So here you have another completed card, and I just love this die. You know, 3 different cards, 3 different looks, and I think they are all gorgeous and stunning, and I just love this motif with the water lilies. For this next card, I'm going back to some of the elements that I used on my first card, but at this time I'm going to make it more, instead of a shabby chic, I'm going with like a grungy chic. And I'm using my favorite Distress Oxides here. This is Peacock Feathers, Mustard Seed, and Picked Raspberry, and these colors combine really well. If you are going to get Distress Oxides, honestly, I suggest you start off with these colors if you haven't started off with other colors before, because you can make all the colors of the rainbow just using these 3 colors. So it's really versatile, and this is kind of my go-to whenever I'm creating a rainbow. So I'm going with a rainbow theme here just because I'm not great with color theory, and so I know at least a rainbow will always look nice and the colors will go well together. And you can see here as I'm blending this, I'm getting other colors besides just the pink, blue, and yellow. So I'm getting the green there when I blend those together, I'm getting the purple, and then you'll see I get a little bit of orange. So, you know, again, those 3 colors, you get all the colors of the rainbow. It's hard to see here, but I go ahead and I distress this a little bit just using my spray bottle. And it's subtle, but it gives it more of a distressed kind of grungy look. Those distress oxides are water reactive, and so you can kind of see there how those water dots show up. Using that same idea, rather than using ink to go in and kind of make this distressed background, which I could, I debated using kind of like a brown distress oxide or something like that going in to, kind of create some subtle images. But I decided instead I'm going to go ahead and use water on this water reactive ink, and I'm going to go ahead and make the distressed background that way. So I'm spraying a towel with some water, and then I'm going in with just XO, right? XO for hugs and kisses, XO, and I'm going to do the XO over the entire back panel there. As I'm putting this panel together, you'll see I am alternating the X's and O's. So I started with the XO right in the center, so that way I knew it would be centered. And then I'm alternating via the top and the bottom. So like where if there's an X on top, I'm putting an O underneath and vice versa. So that way, it gives it more contrast versus, just having X's all the way or O's all the way on a line. So you can see again here kind of a nice subtle grungy look. To add to that grungy look, I'm using my stencil again, and this time using the X's at the bottom, and I'm going in with the same solar paste. Now, I want to be sure that I only get the X's on here, so I'm just using some Post-it paper tape and just marking that off so that way I don't accidentally get some of the paste on other areas of the stencil. Now, because this paste dries with kind of the same colors as showing through as what's underneath, so it's not going to dry white the way that it is. You'll see that it kind of takes on the colors that are underneath. Again, it'll be subtle. So like this kind of grungy card base is actually going to have a subtle look to it, which is what I was going for. I wanted to use some of the die cuts that I used before, but the colors weren't quite right. So I went ahead and went over the die cuts with some of the Distress watercolor pencils, and these are great to have as well. And what's nice also is that I know that they're going to match perfectly with the Distress Oxide colors that I have. So these colors are the same colors, the Peacock Feather, Mustard Seed, Picked Raspberry, and I'm just going over the different flowers, which are already pink, yellow, and blue, but this way I know that they will match perfectly. I could leave these just as they are, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to activate these watercolors just by spraying them with some water. And as with the other die cuts, I'm going ahead and I'm just cutting out the white outline there, just because I think the white outline can detract from the rest of the card. So this way it won't be a distraction. To add to the grungy look and also again to not have that white outline, I'm going around the outline just a little bit, just on the edges there with a black marker. So one, it defines the flower a bit more, and two, it hides that kind of white outline. Using the VersaFine ink again, and so this time I'm going to stamp the XO several times to make a sentiment, XO, XO. Then I'm going to go over it with embossing powder, but this time I'm going over it with clear sparkle embossing powder. I did a lot of them on a line like that because originally I was going to do something else. I was going to cut out the letters individually, but with an X-Acto knife, but that didn't work out too well. So I then ended up just cutting it with the Tim Holtz cutter and just decided to just use the 2XOXO, and I'm going ahead and putting the flowers around it. Using another sentiment from my stash, I'm going ahead and I'm going to overlay this over the XOXO. I think that goes well. It just really draws focus to it, and then with the hugs and kisses in the background. Just going ahead, putting all the pieces together here, and I think that comes together really nicely, really quickly once all those pieces are made. I'm adhering it to a black card base, again putting a white sentiment on the inside, a white sentiment space And then I'm adding my personal touch, which is my stamp that says Handmade by Stephanie. I got this stamp many years ago from Etsy. I tried to find it again to link it. I don't think the shop still exists, but there are lots of shops that do similar stamps. So if you're making cards on the regular, I highly recommend getting a stamp made. So that way when you are making your cards and you're sending them out, everybody knows they are special, they came from you, they're handmade. And this is my last card for the day. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope that this gave you some inspiration and some ideas. Be sure to check out the Paper Rose Studio release on spellbinders.com. I will link that down below along with the other supplies that I used. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this was helpful, please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll catch you next time.